Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, March 12th, 2026. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week, Mika Laitinen, author of Viking Age Brew, the craft of brewing Sahti farmhouse ale, talks to Adam Ross of Twinspan Brewing and me about Taari, an ancient Nordic brew that is infused with flavors from baking the thick mash like a loaf of bread in the oven. If you want to support us financially, check out patreon.com/basicbrewing. And many thanks to everybody who's helping out in that way. If you go to patreon.com/basicbrewing, you can see a long list of stuff that you can access if you sign up as a supporter. Financial supporters have already seen an early release of the video that Steve and I made about his Bochet Braggot. That was a delicious and complicated beer that was a hybrid between a rich, burnt honey mead and a Belgian-influenced strong ale. It's the kind of beer that makes you glad to be a home brewer, or at least glad to know a talented home brewer like Steve. Financial supporters will have gotten the recipe for the brew and maybe some behind-the-scenes video from Steve. Steve shot some short videos of his process. I'm recording this episode ahead of time because I'll be out of town, but I should be back by the time you hear this. So I hope I had fun. It's very convoluted, this whole thing. There's good news on the Brewer's Logbook front. I got some messages and emails from those who are interested in buying a copy, so I've told the printer to go ahead and make a run of them. The best news is that the cost is about the same as the last time I printed them, so I'll be able to keep the price of the book the same on the site. The bad news is that shipping has gone up over the past couple of years, so Kelly and I will be working hard to try to keep those costs down, especially for those of you outside the U.S. who have expressed interest. I appreciate your support ahead of time, and keep checking basicbrewingshop.com for when those go active. Today I'm planning to package the fun New Zealand Motueka beer that I brewed with brown sugar and B45 Gnome from our friends and sponsors at Imperial Yeast. I think this one's going to be a really tasty one. My original gravity was 1064. I used American two-row and a bit of malted wheat, bittering with Czech Sats, and adding a bunch of Motueka post-boil for a 10-minute hop stand. I used a pound of light brown sugar for the flavor and a gravity boost. I'm not sure how much color that's going to add. It'd be fun to see what it looks like. I haven't had a chance to taste it yet, but I can't wait. B45 Gnome was the first seasonal yeast from Imperial. You might be able to still find it at your local homebrew store. Those 200 billion cells in that easy-to-open, newly redesigned packet got to work in a hurry without a starter. I forgot to check if my airlock was bubbling before bedtime, but Gnome was definitely happy the next morning. It's one of those where I was a little worried it was going to crawl out of the carboy because it had a tremendous amount of foam on top. I'm assuming that's from the wheat. But Gnome behaved itself in the end, and it looks like it flocculated out nicely. So since I'm posting early this episode, I'm recording early, I don't know what the next seasonal yeast is going to be from Imperial, but I'm sure it will be a good one. Ask your local homebrew store about Imperial Yeast and check out all the dependable deliciousness at imperialyeast.com. That's imperialyeast.com. Okay, in Mika's Viking Age Brew book, he introduced us to Sahti, the history and how to brew it. But since then, he's come on the show to talk about other traditional Nordic beers. And now, Mika tells us about a baked beer fermented in the mash with no boil that seems to write its own rules. Mika Laitinen, welcome back to Basic Brewing Radio.
Thanks. Nice to be back here.
Again, I am drawn to talking to you because of an Instagram post. You posted about this fascinating beer not too long ago, and I said, that's my excuse to get to talk to Mika again. So I'm glad that you're able to join us.
Yeah, and this is highly special beer, which we are talking about.
Well, speaking of highly special, we've got a highly special person to join us in the conversation. Adam Ross from Twinspan Brewing up in Bettendorf, Iowa. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you, I think.
I always pick on you. I don't know why I pick on you so much.
I've been told I'm special before.
I only pick on the people I like. So, take that, take that as you were, or as you will. Uh, Adam, I'm bringing you into the conversation because you brewed a sati recently, which is, along the lines of Mika's part of the world. So I thought that you could help me answer some halfway intelligent questions.
Yeah, maybe. I brewed the sake because I read Mika's book on a flight a few years ago, and it was a case of I started and finished the book en route, and when I landed, I was like, I want to brew a sake, and I don't know if I want to take this off the rails right away, but I don't know if it's actually a sake. So I did half of the grain was a Stjordal smoked malt, and the other half was under-modified Pilsner. We There's pictures online. I think I sent some to you, Mika. We This year we brewed it in a wooden barrel. We had straw and juniper branches and berries to filter the mash. We didn't boil. We did Kvike yeast, Voss Kvike, and it is interesting beer. It's equal parts sweet, smoky, and sour. And every year we change the recipe. This was our third year making the sati, and this one was certainly I'd say the most complex. But the thing I get pushback on is people say sati doesn't have smoked malt. So is that true?
Today it is true, but in the past all the farmhouse malt were smoky, or at least almost. So it's
Great.
kind of a historical version of sati.
Yeah, and that's what we're going for. We actually list the style as a Viking brew instead of sati. We call it sati, but the style we list is Viking brew. And we promote it as being an ancient recipe. So I appreciate you saying that because I've been calling it sati for 3 years now.
Yeah,
Sounds like you're
sounds very, very authentic.
exactly what I was going to say.
Great.
So this beer, and I'll try to pronounce it the way Mika pronounces it. It's Taari or Taari. Am I close?
You are close, Taari.
As I said before the interview, I'm from Arkansas, and if I try to affect an accent, I might sound pretentious. So I might rely on my more Americanized pronunciation. But I saw this beer it's a baked beer, and I looked back in the archive, and I did thanks to the advice from Lars Marius Garschel back in 2020. I attempted a small batch brew in a bag Captinus, which also involves baking grain in the oven. How similar is Taari to Captinus, or are they of the same family?
Yeah, I think these two beers are related, and I like to think that Taari is like a Captain's from the mists of times, and I believe that Captain was at one point brewed in the same way as Taari, but Taari is like a more archaic way to brew Captain. So these are very related. Both have a baked mash as a grain and malt source.
Give us a little bit of the history of Taari, and where does it come from, and both regionally and in time?
My sources of Taari are from Karelia, which is a region partly divided between Finland and Russia. And my most sources are from people who come from the so-called lost Russia, which Finland lost to Russia in World War II. And it seems that nobody brews Taari anymore, but I have a lot of documentation how it was brewed in 1930s and early 20th century. It was brewed in a farmhouses which used to have a really big oven for heating the house and cooking the food, and also for brewing the beer. So the houses started to heat the house in the morning, and then they started to cook, make bread, stews, pies, and in the evening they baked a mash for the beer. And next morning they took the mash from the oven. It was kind of not exactly bread, but more like a bread-shaped baked mash, really dark and caramelized and baked lot of baked flavors. And then they crumbled the baked mash into a wooden bucket filled with straws and wooden stalks for filter. And then they topped up with water and add yeast into the mash. So this was not filtered before drinking, or there was no lautering step. The mash was fermented. And then after around 2 days, 1 or 2 or 3 days, then they just opened the tap, and the beer flowed from the mash into the pint.
We're either breaking all the rules of brewing that traditional brewing that we know, or more likely this came before all those rules were written. It sounds like this was maybe like an ancient method of making beer that more modern techniques were brought out of. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. That's why I like Taari, because it looks like a beer from ancient Mesopotamia or Egypt, because the mash ferments and not the conventional word.
Yeah, not only is it no boil, there's no kettle at all. It's just everything happens in the bucket or in the mash tun, sort of.
Yeah. Today it seems a bit complicated to brew because there's a wooden bucket and straws and a big oven with a wood fire. But for Karelians, it was the most simplest thing to do to get beer.
Yeah, this seems like a product of convenience rather than something you would do specifically for the flavor. This is essentially a malt extract process. This is something that sounds like people who, well, I don't imagine there were professional brewers per se back then, but this seems like something that a quote non-brewer could handle. Basically, just add water, and if it's a wild fermentation, just add water and walk away.
Yeah. And in Estonia, they brew a slightly similar beer called Seto-Olu in the southeast corner of Estonia. And they sell these kind of beer loaves in a shop, and people just buy the beer loaf and take it at home and start the fermentation with out of some yeast and sugar.
Oh, wow. So it's already baked. It's all you have to do is take it home and break it up and sort of dilute it and let it ferment.
Yeah, I've done this a few times in a medieval festivals, but it's a bit boring because I just go there and break the bread and add water and yeast and okay, I'm ready.
Where's the fun in that?
Yeah.
So what's
Is it?
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna say I'm looking at I have your picture of your malt loaf from your Instagram page up on my screen. It looks very baked on the outside, almost charred, but the inside it looks like is less baked. Is it still soft in the middle, or does that not matter? Is this something that can sit on a shelf for weeks or months, or is it something that you need to hurry up and use because the inside is still has some sugar?
It's soft inside, and I have noticed that when the outside is when the loaf is not broken, then it can be stored for something like 2 or 3 weeks. But if it's broken, then it gets moldy very fast. So it's kind of not for months, more like a week or two.
Okay.
I guess we haven't talked about the character of the beer, or maybe I should say beers that come out of this process.
Yeah, exactly. Taari is always brewed with many waters or rinses or runnings.
And there's a photograph on your Instagram account, Brewing Nordic, and your website is brewingnordic.com, we must say. But the difference between these three beers is incredible, just how they look. But can you talk about the character of each of these runnings that you experienced? I mean, the first one is very dark, and then the last one is very light. But I assume their flavors correspond to their color.
Yes, the colors tells a lot about beer. The first one is really thick and robust in flavor, not high in alcohol, more like a 3 to 5%, like Captain is. So that's the best beer. But then you take out the first Taari and then you add more water to the mash, which has fermented, and then you pull out the next Taari of the second water, and that's begins to taste more like a table beer, like quite good table beer, not like diluted soft drink, but it's really tasty, but low in alcohol, something like 1 to 2%. But you don't stop there. You just add more water, and then you get the Taari of the third water, and that's already quite diluted. It doesn't look very pale. It's more like an orange color, and it's quite pleasant as a soft drink, not an alcoholic drink. It's more like it's really hard to measure the alcohol level, but I think it's non-alcoholic, like a less than 0.5% ABV. And if you want, you can take also the fourth and fifth and sixth Taaris, but I usually stop at 3 because the third one is quite diluted already. But in the old text, there are references that say that the Taari of the seventh water is is really diluted. Like if something is really worthless and worth nothing, it's Taari of seventh water.
It's homeopathic beer at that point, I think.
Yeah. And the old books also mentioned that, and that sometimes the farmhouse people took the grains and all the sugars out from the grains so well that even animals didn't eat the spent grains. So it was really efficient process.
And no hops, right?
No.
Any other flavorings or seasonings besides just the grain?
Well, not exactly seasonings, but the straws were used as a filter, and then juniper branches as a cleaning agent. You make cook juniper branches in the water and clean all the buckets with juniper water. And then also potatoes have been used along the grains. So you make a mash with grains and potatoes and bake all that because you can get sugars also from potatoes.
I guess we should we start talking about the process of kind of step by step of how you make your sort of modern version today. Where do you start? First of all, what's the grain bill look like? What grains are you using?
Karelians often used only rye, but they used both unmalted and malted rye because they didn't want to malt so much. They used only small amount of rye malt, maybe 1/3 or half or even less. Just a small amount of malt and then more unmalted rye. And then you make just like with Keptinis, you make a kind of porridge from the unmalted rye malt and water, and you let it become slightly sweet before baking. It doesn't have to be really totally converted like a normal mash, because the oven does the final conversion of the mash.
And using rye would help the second and third and further runnings retain more mouthfeel, or be more substantial, I would assume.
Yeah, it gives a lot of oily mouthfeel and a lot of it's very thick and also kind of unusual for the modern beer drinker. It's very very thick and grainy and full of flavor.
Yeah, as people know, I've made 100% malted rye beers before, and it's very slimy. If you try to use the same starting gravity as a normal beer, you're going to get cough syrup sort of in the end, because it's very viscous and has a lot of body to it. But I imagine in this instance, where it's a low alcohol beer, it would be very helpful in having something that's sort of substantial and satisfying to drink.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also the baking modifies the rye character so that it's not so thick when the mash is baked.
So what temperature and how much time do you bake your? And I assume it's got to be a really thick mash in order for it to be shaped into a loaf form and hold that form, during the baking process.
Yes, there is a very special trick for making Taari loaves because if you combine all the grains and water at once, you have to use plenty of water to get it in a kind of mixable dough-like mash. But the Taari brewers, they used to take all the water and part of the grains and then add it to the mash and then wait it for the conversion so that part of the sugars are extracted into the wort, and then it's makes the mash more liquid. And then you add more grains to it, and you repeat it this 3 or 4 times so that you get a mash which becomes more liquid because the sugars are become soluble and starches become sugars, and then when you get more liquid like mash, then you add more grains.
And are we shooting for a more of a kind of a standard mash temperature at this point, or what part? How hot is the water that you're putting the grain in?
It doesn't matter so much. It's more like between 60 and 75 Celsius.
Okay, so
I don't know the Fahrenheit.
yeah, close to 65 is 150 degrees Fahrenheit. So close to standard saccharification temperatures. It's early. It's early here. I need more coffee. Uh, but then and you would assume that once you form this into a loaf and put it into the oven, that it's going to take a while for the grain or the mash that's inside the loaf to reach the oven temperature. So maybe there's a buffer of time that the different parts of the loaf are going through different temperatures inside to kind of complete that conversion process.
Yeah, exactly. That's why you don't have to have you don't need the full core conversion before baking, and the oven finishes the conversion. That's why the water to grain ratio is really important, because if you make it too diluted, then you can get a really nice cake pile of mash. But when you start baking it, the sugar start to run out from the bread. So you have to have a quite thick that when the loaf is baked, the sugar stay inside the loaf.
And I discovered when I did my Keptinus, that I put it in a bread pan, and really only the top of the grain that was exposed to the air of the oven got nicely browned, and the rest of it that was inside the metal part of the bread pan didn't. So I imagine if you're forming these loaves, these freestanding loaves, you get a lot more caramelization and browning than you would if you just stuck them in a pan like I did.
Yeah, and that's part of the big flavor of this beer, because you get layers of flavor. The outer crust is really dark, almost black, and a bit toasted and roasted, and then you get a caramel flavor beneath that, and then inside you get a kind of baked bread flavor, more like a Maillard reactions
Mhm.
inside the loaf. But it's like in when you brew a porter, you add pale malt, caramel malt, and roasted malt, and perhaps also some toasted malts. But here you get all those flavors from one baking.
Adam, jump in anytime you want. I know that you're probably don't let me dominate the questioning.
No, no, it's I'm just sitting here thinking I really want to make one of these and that I could do it fairly easily with my commercial brew house. I will brew beers with 600 plus pounds of grain. I just want to scoop some out towards the end of the mash. Probably let them all the liquid run out, and then take some loaves home and bake them and try some small batches. I looking at the three beers you posted the picture of. The first one is like a porter, second one's red or an amber, and the last one looks like a pale ale. So that sounds like a lot of fun.
Hmm.
Um, it would be very difficult to measure the amount of alcohol in there, especially since you're fermenting the grains in there. If you do a wild fermentation, I imagine it'd be difficult because there's going to be extraction of sugar throughout this process. It's not going to be like when you make a quote normal modern beer and you can say here's the starting sugar, here's the finishing sugar. Since the grain is left in the water during fermentation, you're going to get some extraction, so you won't be able to get that clear starting point.
Yeah, exactly. There's no starting gravity, because when you start fermentation, the sugars are released slowly into the wort at the same time as fermentation. So it's kind of really would be a good university project to measure the alcohol of Taari.
Right. I unfortunately commercially that makes this something I can't really sell unless I do find someone at a university or a lab to do a proper alcohol assessment. So that just means I'll have to drink it by myself.
And send it to
Yeah.
us.
Yeah. And one possibility is also to make a normal beer, but part of the mash replaced with this kind of Taari love.
Mm.
That makes a really interesting, like a really rustic amber or brown ale with
Yeah, I can see that.
unusual
Yeah.
character.
One thing that I discovered when I did my version, my brew in a bag Keptiness, what I did was I did a mash, pulled the bag out, and then took that essentially spent grain and put it in the oven, in the loaf pan, and put it in the oven. And it took a while to get any kind of caramelization. And I got to thinking, well, I've rinsed all the sugars or most of the sugars out of the grain already, so anything that's going in the oven is not going to have the same caramelization level as unlaudered or undrained grain. So when you're making a thick mash with all the sugars still in it, it seems like it would brown and get a lot more interesting tasting than if you were to use, say, spent grains. Just taking them out of the mash after they've been converted and trying to roast that.
Yeah, and well, it's I have brewed Taari perhaps 5 times, and it's every time it's different. The baking process, it depends on so many things on size of the bread and heat of the oven and so many things. So it's kind of beer where you cannot expect the same results every time.
Which is part of the fun of it,
Yeah,
in my
yeah.
mind.
Yeah.
So now that we've got our baked and caramelized and beautiful loaf of mash, where do we go from here?
You can start brewing right away, or you can wait for a few days or even a week. You don't have to brew right away. You can store the loaf. But I like I bake in one day and next day I brew Taari. So I take a bucket and then I break the Taari loaf into the bucket and then add lukewarm water. It doesn't have to be hot or warm water at this point. And then I add something to ferment it. The Karelians used many different kind of things to ferment this. Some people used yeast, either baker's yeast or perhaps brewer's yeast or perhaps even farmhouse yeast. I'm not sure about that because it's the documentary is very sketchy about the fermentation. And some people used a sourdough starter, which they used for the rye bread. And some people just let it ferment
Ah,
like spontaneously. Uh, obviously, if you do it this first time, it's best to use the yeast, which you know how it performs. So that's the easiest thing. But you can also use sourdough starter if you want to brew like more like a cook and get slight sourness into the brew. It's really suits this beer. At least my sourdough starter doesn't make the beer very sour. It's more like a sweet and slightly sour beer.
and so once the fermentation is done on that, do you serve it out of the bucket, or do you bottle or package all of that runnings, or what traditionally what's done?
Uh, yeah, the Karelian used to just pull out the beer from the bucket right after fermentation. But uh, when we are brewing modern version of this beer, like not I don't mean like a really modern version. I mean more like a modern equipment and techniques, like just to get it easy in the kitchen. Then you wait for the mash to ferment, and then you take out the wort. And you can, for example, use the brew in a bag method. So you put the loaves and water in the bag, and then you let it ferment, and then you pull out the brew in a bag. So it's kind of really unusual way to brew in a bag, but it works in these cases. So it really, I think it mimics well the old process.
You probably still want to throw in some juniper branches or berries because that will contribute to the flavor. I know that's very perceptible in this year's sati, and we did the hay and juniper branches for filtration, and I don't know if the hay contributed any flavor, but the branches certainly did. So I would think brewing a bag, I would want to still toss in something, or else you'd miss that flavor.
Yeah. Even in some Karelians use the juniper branches, and sometimes it was part of the filter. So there was straws and also juniper branches, which they didn't think like a flavoring, but it certainly adds more flavor to the beer.
It makes a great lauter bed. The one we did, we brewed it in a barrel, and we just laid down a few handfuls of straw that we had washed and branches, and we had an excellent runoff. No drain came through. No, we barely had to boil off. It was just we pulled open the tap and the liquid just started flowing. I was surprised by
Yeah.
that. I was expecting to get stuck and have all these issues, and it was beautiful.
Juniper branches are really good lautering filter. When you have enough juniper branches, it makes really good filter.
So I'm assuming that this is not a carbonated beer, right?
Um, yeah, traditionally not, but what you can do, you pull out for. Let's say you are doing the brewing in a bag method. So you pull out the bag and collect the liquid and put it in the bottles. And if you drink it like that, that would be traditional Taari. But I like to cheat a little bit and add a bit of sugar to get some carbonation to the beer.
Now say we've got our bag of the loaf and the juniper branches or whatever we put in there with it. We want to do another running, so we put it back into the bucket and then put more water on top of that. Do we need to add more yeast at that point?
No, you just add equal amount of water which you just took out, and then you let it in. You can mix it and then let it infuse for at least 4 hours or half a day. Then you can do another rinse to get the Taari of the second water.
And I'm assuming that second fermentation would be quicker since there's less to ferment.
Yeah, and it depends also on how long the first fermentation was. When I've been brewing Taari, the Taari is not fully fermented when I pull out the first Taari. So the second fermentation continues. And then when I take the third, then it's more like almost no fermentation, more like just collecting rinsing the remains of the fermentation from the mash.
And if you're taking a beer that's not quite finished fermenting and packaging it, bottling it, and maybe adding some sugar, you want to be careful that you don't get too carried away with adding a lot of sugar because you could get over pressurized bottles. But it seems like something that you'd want to drink fairly quickly, though.
Yeah. You really need to be careful. I always bottle this into the soda bottles, plastic soda bottles, so that I can feel the pressure on the bottles. And one possibility to get carbonation is when you pull out the Taari and put it in the bottles, then you wait few hours and feel it. If it gets pressure, then you put it in a fridge or cold place. But this beer really needs to be stored in a cold place, or otherwise you can get too much pressure in the bottles.
Too much. Adam, should I do
There
it?
it is. Under pressure. Yeah, our sati, I know this is different than Taari, but similar process because it had that spontaneous component. It had the no boil. It was a raw ale. Um, I don't even think about using glass. We do bottle it, but we use the thicker bottles. We use the cork and the cage, and
Yeah,
they will absolutely continue to ferment and carbonate.
yeah.
Um,
Especially with some quakes, they can really
yeah.
continue to ferment long
Right,
time.
they'll go very dry. I'm looking on your page here, and you said you tried Kveik, and you also tried a sourdough starter. The sourdough starter ferment got you down to 3.7 pH, which is higher than I expected. I would expect that to go quite low. Which did you prefer, the Kveik or the sourdough starter?
Um, yeah, that was interesting. For the first thickest Taari, I preferred the quake. But then when I took the second and third rinse, I preferred the sourdough starter because it's with the more diluted beers. I liked the kind of tartness which add complexity to the beer. Yeah, that would be really difficult to do to get the good beer without sourness and then get the sourness for the second and third runnings. Perhaps that's possible, but it's kind of tricky.
Are there any other grains other than rye that you would think would be interesting additions to the loaf?
The Karelians have used also both oat malts and raw oats, but I'm not sure because of flavor or just because it's what's growing in a backyard.
Hmm. Yeah, that it may be since it's such an ancient beverage. It's just whatever you have on hand was what you what you brewed with.
Yeah.
I have to imagine no one's brewing this commercially. You can't go out and go to a brewery and get this.
No, no, not exactly. In Lithuania, there's uh, Dundulis Brewing is doing Keptinis in the bottles. And that's not like Taari, but it's something similar. That's the closest commercial example. But I guess even that is not imported. I have tasted only in Lithuania and especially imported in Finland.
I would imagine that this would lend itself to small batches, especially if you're doing it at home. How much? How large is your standard, batch or bucket, or what volume are we talking about?
Usually I do this in a 10-liter kettle, so it's small, quite small batch. But then I take 6 liters of the first runnings and then 6 liters of the second and third, and then eventually I get almost like 20 liters or
Hmm.
5 gallons of ale, but in three versions.
Hmm. It sounds
And that's one thing which I like with this beer. You can brew it really easy way in a kitchen without any fancy equipment. You can just take a cooking pot and start cooking and baking and brewing.
yeah. It's something that I want to do.
Yeah, same.
Especially with doing the Keptiness before that went. Mine was higher alcohol than standard, I think, than traditional, but it was really tasty and interesting, especially because I used Pilsner malt. And going back and looking at the video from 2020, I used Pilsner malt and was able to get some really nice color just from roasting that Pilsner malt in the oven. And I kind of want another excuse to play with 100% rye beer again.
Right. Well, James, you are American, so you're gonna have to make it stronger and add way more hops than it needs.
Yeah, and put a funny pun filled name on the.
Yes, of course.
I'll lean on you for that.
Yeah. Lithuanians like to drink a lot of medium strength beer. They don't like to drink like a small sips of strong beer. They are more like a volume drinkers.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, we have a certain we have certain traditions over here, good and bad. Well, Adam, do you think that there's anything that we should cover that we haven't covered? Mika wrote us up this excellent document, and I'm assuming that there's going to be a post on brewingnordic.com as well.
I'm not sure yet because I'm writing a new book about Nordic and Baltic farmers beers, and I've written a really good and thick chapter about these kind of beers into the book. So I would like to first get the book published, and then I could think about publishing at the Brewing Nordic site. But
so no spoilers.
yeah.
And also, if you publish it on your blog, unfortunately, Google's AI will scrape it and steal your viewers and put it out there. So take care of your intellectual property any way you can.
Yeah, this is kind of beer which was easy to brew for the Karelians, but it's really hard to explain for modern brewers who are not used to bake mash or ferment mash, and so it's so unusual beer that it requires a lot of explanation.
Yeah, I really want to taste this. I have no idea what this would, even with your good descriptions you have online and you've given here. This is unlike anything I've brewed or tasted. So I really, I want to go out and just make this right now and drink it right now. But I'll have to make it first.
Well, excellent. Mika, this has been fun. Keep up the posts on Instagram at Brewing Nordic, and I'm envious of your beers and your excellent collection of sweaters.
I have too many sweaters, so my wife always tells me that you haven't worn that sweater. Oh, well, I don't have time to wear all these sweaters.
Send them to me on the 1 or 2 days a year that it's that it's cold enough to wear one of your sweaters. I'll wear it. Adam could probably use your sweaters a lot more than I could.
Yeah. I don't think we get as cold as you guys do, but yeah, we get some weather up here.
All right, guys, this has been a lot of fun. Mika, thanks very much for the information and the time and the chat. And Adam, thanks very much for the conversation and the questions. Thanks, guys.
All right, thanks.
Thanks. It was a really fun show.
Well, thanks again to Mika for the fun chat. Be sure to follow him on the socials as Brewing Nordic and on the web at brewingnordic.com. And thanks again to Adam of Twin Span Brewing in Bettendorf, Iowa. I'm glad that he joined us. He seems fired up to brew a Taari of his own. If you have brewing questions, shows, suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Check out our mobile-friendly shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody supporting us through our Patreon page. Special goodies coming your way. Check that out at patreon.com/basicbrewing. So until next time, until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voice, and we'll talk to you next time. In the meantime, stay well and stay tuned. So long.